The story of Battlefield's new Battle Royale, the Redacted Sector, or RedSec, is actually hugely important to the story of Battlefield 6 as a whole, and has quite an interesting story that ties itself into the campaign, the multiplayer, and sets up the next RedSec map coming next year. That's right, you heard it here first, RedSec has a new map coming next year, but before we dive into that, let's dive into the story of RedSec, what's going on, and what's actually happening. So the story of RedSec really begins after the War of 2020 when the United States government finds documents on the Solace Project, an experiment from World War II ran by the Germans where they engineered devices that built a ring of fire that slowly closed in on itself, burning through everything in the process. And this was an experiment done to see who was the best soldier and develop a secretive group called the Solace Group, who would actually come back later on in Battlefield 2042. But the United States government found these documents on this mysterious ring of fire weapon. And the United States wanted to figure out what this weapon was and how to use it because it could be an alternative to nuclear weapons, thus preventing the fallout from an all-out nuclear war. Instead, it would just burn through everything and destroy all targets. A safer version of a nuclear bomb. And so the United States partners with the Walker-Senex Corporation in Fort Linden, California to reproduce this ring of fire weapon that they didn't really know what it was. So Walker-Senex begins researching this weapon, creating different compounds, and finally creates a new propellant implosion weapon called a nano-explosive compound, or NXC. Now the way NXC works is by first propelling outwards the explosive compound into the air over a massive area radius. When it reaches its maximum distribution range, a additionally dispersed timed explosive is released, causing the NXC to burn outwards in slowly, the same way the Solace weapon was described from World War II. Except for NXC can burn through concrete, steel, and just about anything because it burns at around 5,000 degrees Celsius, burning through everything as it slowly closes in on itself. Now, where this becomes interesting is how it ties into the campaign. Now, the Walker-Senex Corporation, who invented the NXC, was run by their CEO, Faik Salim, who was an Egyptian citizen. Now, Salim stole 4 NXC warheads out of his company's facility in Fort Linden and then sold them to Pax Armata for a good chunk of money. He was trying to play both sides of the NATO Pax Armata war. However, after his deception was discovered by both sides, Dagger 1-3 was sent to extract him and the intel of what he stole and where it went. Dagger 1-3, the team from the campaign, was sent to go find out what happened and where he went. And when Dagger 1-3 arrived at his location in Egypt, he was shot and bleeding out. His intel of the transactions, the NXC, and everything that they needed to know, however, were implanted on a chip inside of his thumb, so they had to cut off his thumb and take it actually back to America to find out what happened to the weapons. Now, after the CIA combs through all of the information on the RFID chip inside of Salik's thumb, they find out that he sold the weapons to Pax Armata and they were placed inside missiles in Tajikistan at Pax Armata's headquarters. This takes us to the final mission of Battlefield 6 set in Tajikistan, where Dagger 1-3 alongside NATO forces are assaulting the Pax Armata headquarters and trying to stop the NXC warheads from being launched. However, the NXC warheads are already set to launch, and 3 of the 4 warheads are disabled. Unfortunately, because the 4th warhead cannot be disabled, the NATO forces decide instead to detonate the warhead on the ground. This starts a race against the clock for Dagger 1-3 to go kill Kincaid and get out. And after killing Kincaid, when Hemlock is actually flying the helicopter out of the zone, you can see in the background the ring of fire created by the NXC. Now we cut to a couple months later. Most of the United States military forces have been moved to the East Coast to kind of fight off the remaining Pax Armata forces who have established a foothold in Brooklyn. Now at this point, Pax Armata is relatively speaking losing the war, and they are desperate to try to get some type of foothold or step up on NATO. So their solution is to start a full-scale invasion in California, specifically targeting the Fort Linden facility where NXC is being made. This is when Pax Armata deploys multiple mercenary teams to assault the Walker-Senex facility in California, with the sole goal to steal as many NXC warheads as they possibly can. Now, the NXC warheads are actually being produced in 2 parts. There is a chemical facility where the NXC compound is actually being made, just a little distance away from the Walker-Senex facility, and then they are being run underground to the Walker-Senex facility where they can be placed in warheads and then shipped off to wherever they need to be. But during the assault, as Pax Armata is stealing some of these warheads, they accidentally set off one in the underground tunnel connecting the chemical production facility and Walker-Senex's headquarters, the area called the Epicenter. The detonation here is so large it causes a 9.1 magnitude earthquake that ripples across the entire state. And as expected, the NXC warhead explodes, dispersing its compound over a large area around Fort Linden, and then catches fire, slowly burning its way inward. It is even burning on top of water, where it cannot be extinguished. There is currently nothing in the Battlefield universe that can extinguish NXC. And nothing can actually put out this fire at all. There's nothing that extinguishes it in the current day in the Battlefield universe. As a matter of fact, we're going to talk about that a little bit more in a minute as it relates to the next RedSec map coming in late 2028. But after the detonation of the NXC around Fort Linden, the National Guard of California actually extracts its civilians and helps them get out of the area. But they are fighting off Pax Armata all the while extracting civilians, and Pax Armata troops are still stuck in the NXC Ring of Fire. And after the detonation of the NXC, many Pax Armata troops are unable to leave the combat zone. In response, America sends in a NATO team to infill into the Ring of Fire, find out what's going on and what's actually happening with the NXC and Pax Armata, and then get the hell out. However, Pax Armata wants to get their guys out as well, and each team is only capable of getting one extraction helicopter out of the Ring of Fire, as both teams fight to collect intel and then try to get to their escape helicopter, fighting each other in the process. Pax versus Pax, NATO versus NATO, and Pax versus NATO all at once. Everybody is fighting everybody as all the teams are trying to get to the exfil alongside the intel that they've been picking up as they've been fighting. Now, it's unclear what the canonical correct answer is, if it's Pax Armata or NATO that gets their troops out at the end of the mission. However, we know one thing for sure. Pax Armata was able to get out some of the NXC compounds and warheads before the Ring of Fire closed in around Fort Linden. And we know this because Battlefield 2042 directly addresses what happens next in the Battlefield 6 universe. And what happens next is that Pax Armata actually takes this NXC compound back to their new headquarters somewhere outside of Europe and begins reverse engineering it, trying to break it down and figure out what it is that makes NXC work the way it does. And in the process, they actually redesign NXC in a new compound, NXC2. NXC2 is a little bit different because it doesn't just burn in once the ring is established, it also burns out. And NXC will continue to burn everything until it runs out of fuel. It will even use different things like nature and organic materials as fuel to keep itself going. So the new version of NXC, NXC2, both expands outwards from the ring and closes in. But as we learn from Battlefield 2042, Pax Armata actually uses the NXC2 warhead in the Baltic, somewhere around Estonia and Latvia, which reveals to us, via the Battlefield 2042 lore, that is the next RedSec map that we are going to get, somewhere in the Baltics. But that's not it. NXC2 is so combustible and so easily carried by environmental factors like wind and water that is actually picked up and spread across Europe over the course of the next 10 years, burning 2,000 miles of European land in 10 years. And it takes the world 10 years to develop something to extinguish it. But the next RedSec map begins its story in the Baltics with the next detonation of NXC2 in 2028. If you like that, subscribe down below, and until next time, I'm IceBurgz. Stay frosty.